Making quality pure maple syrup requires a lot of hard work and careful attention to detail. From the tree to the bottle, many steps are required to produce the high-quality product that sugar makers are known for and customers expect. Hello, this is Mark Isselhart from the University of Vermont Extension Maple Program. There are 4 grades of pure maple syrup that can be sold in a retail container. They are golden color, delicate taste, amber color, rich taste, dark color, robust taste, and very dark color, strong taste. It is up to the producer, or whomever's name appears on the retail container, to correctly identify which grade their syrup falls. While color and flavor are the 2 most distinguishing characteristics of maple syrup, all syrup must meet the legal standard in 4 categories: color, clarity, flavor, and density. This video will cover the basics of color grading maple syrup. Assuming a sample of syrup has been properly graded and meets the minimum standards for clarity, flavor, and density, it is the color that determines the grade. There are defined ranges of color for each of the 4 grades of maple syrup. Color grading maple syrup essentially means placing a sample of syrup correctly into one of 4 ranges of color. Syrup must be as light or lighter than the low end of the color grade in which it falls, and not whichever grade it appears closest to. Being able to accurately determine syrup color and know into which grade of syrup it belongs is the job of the sugar maker. There are several factors that can impact the apparent color grade of syrup. These include syrup density, syrup temperature, syrup clarity, the device used to compare colors, light source quality, and experience of the grader. Officially, the limits are defined as a range of light transmittance values at a specified wavelength. Light transmittance is the amount of light that will pass through a given object at a given wavelength of light. The higher the number, the more light that will pass through. Golden syrup has a range from 100 to 75% light transmittance. Amber, 74 to 50%, dark, 49 to 25%, and very dark, less than 24%. Precise measurements of light transmittance can be made with either a spectrophotometer or a photometer. These devices employ a specific light source and special optics to measure the amount of light that passes through a given liquid. Spectrophotometers can measure light over a range of wavelengths, are usually found in laboratory settings, and are generally expensive. Simple and relatively inexpensive photometers that measure light transmittance at just one wavelength are being marketed directly to sugar makers. Like all precision instruments, calibration is essential if measurements are to be accurate. Make sure to follow the manufacturer's instructions if you use one of these devices to color grade maple syrup. Make sure that the syrup has been effectively filtered and that there are no air bubbles. Unfiltered or poorly filtered syrup will provide results that are inaccurate. The majority of sugar makers use a color comparator to grade their syrup. There are 2 types of color comparators available: temporary and permanent. Permanent kits have precisely tinted glass or plastic that resists fading over time. The other type of comparator is the temporary grading kit. New kits include 3 color standards corresponding to the legal minimum color for golden, amber, and dark syrup. No standard is included for very dark syrup, since any syrup which is darker than dark robust and meets the minimum in terms of clarity, density, and flavor would be graded as very dark. So the best place to demonstrate color grading maple syrup is here in the sugar house. You've made syrup on a given day, you've done the appropriate grading for clarity and density, now it's time to check the color. There are a few things that are really important to know about using a temporary kit. Probably the biggest important thing to know is that it's a temporary kit. You should replace them every year, or at least have them checked every year to make sure the color hasn't faded. And I have an example here of a kit that was made in 2014, and you have a golden delicate from 2017, and they're quite different in color. The effect of using a glycerin standard that's faded is that it will be almost impossible to make that lightest grade of syrup because it is so light, it's very difficult to make syrup that light. The other important thing to know about these kits is you want to use the sample jar provided. You can see these kits all come with these small square sample jars. There are lots of small glass jars out there. Here's an example of one that's round. The problem is you'll get an inaccurate reading if you use this round jar with comparing it to the square containers. You also want to make sure that you're in an area that has good quality light because you're going to be comparing sometimes very subtle differences in color. If you hold up the kit and you look through the samples, you want to look to a nice bright background, and your eye should be drawn to the difference, the sample of syrup you've made that day and the standard that's closest to it. If the light is poor, it can be very difficult to detect very subtle differences in color. Remember, the rule says that the syrup you're grading has to be as light or lighter than the grade you're going to be calling it, not which grade it's closest to. So in this example, we have a sample of syrup that's really quite close. This sample of syrup is very close to Golden Delicate. However, it's a little bit darker and would have to then be called the darker grade of Amber Rich. The other important thing to know about syrup is that it will darken over time. True maple syrup will darken over time. So if you have an example that's right on the line, you really think it's the lighter grade, remember that once you make it, it starts darkening. And if you have syrup in a bulk container, like a barrel, or in a retail container, it will slowly darken over time and very rapidly be incorrectly graded on color. Another issue about grading maple syrup for color is that the syrup temperature can impact the color grade. So most kits are calibrated to grade color at room temperature. If your syrup is very hot, it's just come off the filter press or just come off the evaporator and has been filtered, it will have a lighter color than a colder syrup. So make sure that your standards and your syrup that you're grading, your sample, is all the same temperature. Another trick when you have very close calls of syrup that's right near the line of the grade, is to hold up the kit to the light and look at it, and then flip the kit around so that you're seeing the sample and the standard from both directions. This can help if the sample is just a little bit darker or just a little bit lighter than the standard. So the basics of color grading are not that complicated. You just want to make sure you're doing them all correctly. And if you have a syrup that's really close to call, have someone else try and have a look and get a second opinion. The following tips can help with the color grading process. Color grading should be done only after density and clarity are correct. Have temporary grading kits checked with a permanent kit annually to ensure color has not faded. Keep temporary kits covered in a cool, dark location. Always use the correct sample jar or vial. Syrup will tend to darken over time. Keep this in mind when grading syrup very close to the line between two grades. There are several sources of information to help when determining the color grade of syrup. One such source is the North American Maple Syrup Producer's Manual. In it, you will find more detailed instructions for successfully color grading maple syrup. Pure maple syrup is a truly special food product. It takes lots of effort and skill to produce the quality product consumers expect. By accurately grading all the batches of syrup you produce and labeling appropriately, you can make sure that only high-quality syrup reaches a retail consumer. More information on this and other issues related to production of pure maple syrup can be found at the University of Vermont Extension Maple page. On behalf of UVM Extension Maple Program, I'm Mark Esselhart.